In this lecture, I'm going to explain some of the most fundamental concepts of any programming language. I will start talking about variables. Okay, a variable. So, what is a variable? Here I have a simple definition. A variable is a storage location paired with an associated name which contains a value. I will put it as simple as I can. A variable is just a place where we will store data. That's it. I will show you examples in code in a bit, so don't worry about that. Now I will explain you its syntax. At the bottom of the slide, in blue, you can see what a variable looks like. To declare a variable, first you must specify a data type. I will explain what data types are in the second half of this lecture. For now, in the first example, you can see that it says int. Int stands for integer. So int means that in this variable I will store a number. The second thing I must specify in a variable is the name. After the name we must write an equal sign, and after the equal sign I must specify the value. The value must be congruent with the data type. If I want to store an integer, I must specify int. If I want to store a character, for example, I must specify char. As I said before, in the second half of this lecture, I will present you the 8 basic data types. Finally, at the end of this statement, or the declaration of the variable, I must write semicolon. If you do not write semicolon, Java will throw an error. Think of it as the dot at the end of the sentence. And this is how a variable looks like in code. Here, I have declared an int called a, which contains the value of 2, and then I have declared a char called b, which contains the value of b. Then I can print out the value of those variables, passing them as parameters of the systemoutPrintln method. Now to test this example, I can click Run, and the results are displayed in the console. Okay, so now it's time to talk about data types. The data type of a value is an attribute that tells what kind of data that value can have. We have seen this before. We specify an int variable, for example, and that variable can only store an int. Okay, so now you may wonder how many data types there are, what they store. The good news is that there are only 8 basic data types, and those are the ones you see listed on a screen: the byte, short, int, long, char, float, double, and boolean. Okay, there are a lot, but most of them do the same. Byte, short, int, and long store numbers. The difference between those 4 is the space they take in memory. So when you create a variable, you are basically creating a storage place. If that storage is larger, it can store more values. If it's smaller, it can store less values. So the difference basically between a short, an int, or a long is the range of values they can store. In most cases, you will take int. Int is like the default integer variable data type. Next, we have char. We have seen this one before. The char basically stores just a character. And I repeat, just one. We will see how to store a whole sentence in a variable in a few lectures. Next, we have float and double. We can store integers, but they are a whole. They don't have decimal part. So float and double are the 2 kinds of data types that can store a decimal part. The difference between them again is that one is smaller and the other is bigger. So when we want to store large decimal numbers, we must choose double. And finally we have the Boolean type. We will talk a lot more about this data type later because it's so important. For now, don't worry too much about knowing every detail about every single data type. As we progress through the lectures, you'll see them again and again and again, and they kind of stick in your head if you see them often, and you will, I promise. To end this lecture, I will return to Eclipse Here I want you to see something. This is a command. This is a one-line command, and this is a multiple-line command. A command is ignored when you click the Run button. And they are used basically to explain a little bit the code so you can understand better the code you are looking at. And that's it. Next, we will review the contents of this lecture in more depth.